Look, I opened this jar of rotten baby food, and well, a butterfly came out.
That's a great setup. Yeah, I think that I think as a comedian, a stand-up comedian, I'm kind of tend to fall in the lines of that it's all fair game.
Welcome to the Comedians and Elevators podcast. I've got my guest, Scott Marcano. Scott, say hi, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey, it's nice to meet everybody. I'm Scott Marcano. If you're not familiar with my work, I'm a comedy writer. I actually broke into Hollywood writing a Pauly Shore movie. I broke in writing Biodome for him and Stephen Baldwin. Then I went on to sell a bunch of comedy specs to Disney and MGM. So I still do a lot of like comedy writing in the industry. I also do a lot of horror and other stuff as well these days. But yeah, that's how I got started. So it was very cool.
Oh, you froze. What happened here? Are we going to unfreeze? We got a freezing going on. Freezing and unfreezing. What's going on with the freezing? Will we unfreeze? Will it be? Will it be? Will it be? Will it be? It looks like. Oh, there you are.
There we are. Yeah, I don't know what happened. I can hear you again.
Right. Froze for a second. So, well, we don't know how much we missed, but are you ready to get started?
Yes, absolutely.
Listen, to my regular listeners, I know you don't like when at the beginning of these conversations I ask you to subscribe. None of us like it. I don't like saying it. I don't like it being in here, but it's frustrating. You know what else is frustrating? It's also frustrating when I look in the back end of the YouTube channel and I see the 56% of you that watch frequently haven't yet subscribed. And I know this because I see it in the comments section. You say things like, I didn't know I didn't subscribe. And that's actually what fuels the show. Basically, it's like you're making a donation to the show. So that's why I ask all the time, because it enables us to build and build and build. And we're going for the long term here. Hit the subscribe button and we'll continue to build this show for you. That's my promise. Thank you to all you guys that do subscribe. It means the world to me. All right, Scott. So the whole point of the podcast is to compare and contrast the comic versus the comedian. So I define the comic as any person telling funny jokes versus the comedian who's a funny person telling any joke. So, Scott, would you agree that you start as a comic and evolve into a comedian?
Yeah, I would definitely say that's true. I think writing jokes is very different than actually having to perform the joke. I wasn't considered over the top funny when I was in high school and college. I mean, people thought I would occasionally come up with funny stuff, but I wasn't the life of the party lampshade on the head kind of guy, but I had a knack for what was funny, and that's how I broke in as a writer because I could write funny scenes, and funny gags for people who were way better at stand up than me, like Polly and and some other folks.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on the lampshade on the head. Obviously, there's a theme here. So let's right.
You
So
wear it well, though. Much better than
thank you.
me.
No, well, fair enough. Fair enough. I might try an actual lampshade next time. So the first question about the role of persona in comedy. So, how much of the comedian's voice is a character versus their real self?
I think that it's if you're writing for me as a writer, I think it's different for everybody. For me as a writer, I always put myself in the role of the character. So the characters tend to reflect different sides of me, not totally me. I tend to find the worst aspects of my personality, like my insecurities, my fears, and you blow them up, because that's what makes for good comedy. But I think, funny characters come from something inside of you. And so, usually when I write a character, I try to imagine sort of myself and my own sort of personality in a certain situation and really make that larger than life. For example, when we did Biodome, we didn't know who was going to be cast. We just had the premise of the script and the characters. We were given it actually, it's funny when we showed up to do the job, we were given a premise that said two guys are stuck in the biodome in the biosphere. That's all it said. So there wasn't really that much about the characters or anything. So we really had to just fill in the blanks from there. So after Polly and Stephen Baldwin were attached to the project, yeah, we had to start writing jokes that were specific to them. So I had to start imagining, okay, how would the dude Polly say this? And we started adjusting the lines accordingly. But yeah, I think in answer to your question, I think it starts with you just, with yourself, trying to find the funniest things about yourself. I think that's a good place to start. Everybody's process is different, but I think that's worked really well for me as a writer.
Yeah, that sounds like that's pretty much the way to get the authenticity is by doing exactly as you're describing. So, punching up versus punching down. So, where do comics versus comedians stand on this? So, let me put it in some historical context. Did a jealous medieval prince become the first comedian by killing the court jester?
That's a great setup. Yeah, I think that I think as a comedian, as stand-up comedian, I'm kind of tend to fall in the lines of that it's all fair game. If you're up there on stage and you're telling jokes, everybody's fair to be, and it's really one of the great equalizers of comedy that everybody can be made fair of. Now, I understand not everybody's on that tip. And I do understand the notion that if you're part of a group that's traditionally been made fun of, you don't want to be the butt of everybody's joke, and I totally get that. Punching down can be a little harsh sometimes. So, as a writer, I try to avoid that. I try to punch up. I try to find people in society or myself, right? If I'm going to make fun of somebody, I'll start with me, making fun of my own neuroses and weird personality. But if I'm going to make jokes, I try to punch up. That's just my style of comedy. I tend to find humor in people who are powerful, right? And have a lot going on. Those tend to be the people I want to ridicule or make fun of the most. But I'm not above making a joke about anybody or anything. I think if it's funny, it should play. And I think Dave Chappelle and also South Park really show that you can punch down, but not make it like you're just pummeling people who don't have a lot of power in society. But again, I think if you wall off certain people and certain subjects and say we can never make fun of this, it kills comedy, and there is some fun in it, and no matter what group you're part of, you have to have the ability to laugh at yourself a little bit. I think it keeps you sane. If you don't have that, I think you'll go nuts. So that tends to be my sort of, rule is that it's okay. I mean, especially with a stand-up, if you're actually the comedian, I think you have a lot more room to do that. When you're the writer, I think you really gotta be a little bit more targeted because you're not up there talking and you can't sell it. You set your joke on the page. So you got to be careful. You don't want to offend people. You don't want to cross certain lines. So that's kind of my thoughts on that. But again, I think all is fair game. If it's funny, we should hear it.
Yeah, so you can see that perhaps if a performer was telling a written joke that they didn't write themselves, they could fall into this trap potentially.
Oh, absolutely. I think that if you're a comedian and you're reading somebody else's lines that somebody wrote for you, oh yeah, you can totally fall into that kind of trap and you can get into a lot of trouble. I mean, it's funny. I was working with a stand-up comedian years ago and I wrote a joke for their monologue where they said, "Oh, this whole room is a touchy-feely zeitgeist." And it was funny, the comedian, I mean, zeitgeist just sort of means like a coming together of people, but this comedian didn't know that. And he was like, Zeitgeist, that sounds like a Nazi word. I don't want to be telling Nazi jokes, Scott. And I was like, dude, it's not that at all. But he wouldn't do the joke. He's like, no, 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 no. If I don't know it, then other people don't know it. So yeah, I can see if you're a comedian, you're just reading somebody's lines, you got to be careful because you could be offending the hell out of people. If you're just reading off the script, that could be a problem.
Yeah, that joke in particular is you kind of have to play it like it's exactly not a Nazi theme, right? Even though it
Right.
was used, but no, that's a really good example. So, cultural translation of comedy. So, how do jokes that work in one country bomb in another?
Well, that's great. Well, one of the biggest examples I think is the difference between us and England. Like a lot of the English British comedy doesn't play over here. Some of it does, but a lot of it doesn't because the British humor is very different, and a lot of Americans find the British humor to be very cruel. I mean, British people, if you really ever watch the original Office or a lot of their best comedies, usually it's everybody fails at whatever they're doing and horrible things happen, and that's a very British thing, and it's very funny
Hmm.
as an American, and by the same token, when they see American comedies, they think our comedy is way too Pollyanna-esque, way too nice, and so it doesn't always translate. So if you're writing for an audience that's from another place, you have to take that into account. If I was writing a script that was to be seen by a British audience, for example, and it was a comedy skit, I would actually really make my comedy much more mean and cruel than I normally do, because there's a lot of punching down that goes on in England, and it's very
Hmm.
much accepted that everybody's going to be made to look like a schmuck. And in America, we try to give people a little bit of hope. That's why in The Office, the American version is not nearly as harsh. I mean, the American version of The Office, done by Ricky Gervais, who did both shows, who was the executive producer. It works out okay for most of the people in the audience, even though I mean, in the show, even though they're part of The Office and they're all the butt of the joke. In the English version, they all lose their jobs at the end of the show, and it's actually a very depressing ending if you've ever seen it. So that's a big difference, and you have to be aware of that. And there's certain things like if you're writing comedy for, like, let's say, a Latino audience, right? There are certain groups which you really will be frowned upon. If you, again, this comes into punching down. If you're making fun of indigenous people, in America that might be seen as ha ha ho ho. South Park did a whole episode with Native Americans. That would not be funny to a Latino audience in Mexico. They will get offended because they bring a lot more of the cultural weight of what it means to be an indigenous person to the table, and still a very lively issue in Mexico. So yes, you absolutely have to know who your audience is and be careful. A lot can get lost in translation, and it just won't be funny. You'll just offend people, and people won't get it at all. And yeah, it'll be
Yeah,
bad.
that's a good example. Native American and maybe a Mexican culture or the audience, and someone might not intuitively catch on to that, and then they get stuck, right? And they're talking about the zeitgeist, and now they're really screwed. So, right? So, along the lines of that, here's I think hopefully a good question: is truth the meaning of facts?
Is truth the meaning of facts? Um, I think truth is different in a sense. I think truth can cut to something that goes beyond facts. And hopefully comedy, that's why comedy is sort of funny in a way. Is comedy literally true and again, part of a big part of comedy is stereotyping large groups of people, right? Almost every stand-up, you go up on stage, you're gonna first thing you do, grab the mic and say, you know how women are. You're classifying all women into one big broad tent, right?
Mhm.
Is that a fact that all women act a certain way and do certain things different than men? No, but there's a truth to it that some do. And I think that's what comedy gets at. That's what makes comedy funny, is that it touches on a truth. Maybe it's an uncomfortable truth or a truth that's not true of everybody, but it's kind of a little bit true. And that's what we find funny. And I think that's what we laugh at. So I think those two things are different. Facts are facts, they're real things, but truth may get out of something that's a little deeper or a little bit nuanced to a fact. And sort of get at something that's, again, if we were just standing up there doing comedy and just telling facts, then it would be a TED talk. It wouldn't be very entertaining, but as a comedian, you can get at these sort of subtle truths that are only half true, but they're still funny, and people will embrace it and go, "Yeah, that's kind of true."
All right, so let me throw it at you this way. I'm gonna ask the same question, and I'm gonna put it in a different sequence. Are facts the meaning of truth?
Yeah, I would say the facts are that they form the basis of it, right?
Okay.
They form the basis of what
So
truth
that's
is,
the easy that's kind of the no-brainer answer, right? So
right?
that's so there's the equation there. All right. So cultural translation actually, so next question, sorry. Crowd work versus crafted work. If comics riff like influencers in the comments section in particular, and comedians perform like in reaction videos, where's the sweet spot?
Gosh, that it really just depends on the comedian. I mean, again, I think riffing on people when they respond to you in the comments section, or or riffing and kind of like talk to me off stage kind of thing is great. And I think that there's the sweet. I think the sweet spot is that you're being honest and truthful. Even if you're telling jokes which offend people and get people upset. And I've had to do this. I did jokes back in college which really offended people. It was intentional. I was trying to call attention to certain things, but yeah, you got to be careful. My sweet spot is if, as far as taking it too far, if people are generally offended and they're writing me hate mail, I've missed that sweet spot. And I have to go back and apologize and explain, what I was doing back when I was in college and I did a comedy newsletter, right, which made fun of the whole campus. I was making fun of all kinds of things, and it was harsh, but I
Mhm.
wanted people to kind of laugh and sort of see some of the things going on in the university. I thought it went too far. I missed the sweet spot. It was too mean. It was punching down, right? And it was being too mean. And people came up to me, like one girl came up to me in tears and said, "This joke made me cry." And I was
Oh,
like, "Okay, that's too far." So for me, that's when I had to go back and really explain. And I put up, manifestos all over campus saying, "These jokes, if they offended you, this is what I was going for. If I missed, I'm sorry. I'm not here to offend. I'm here to laugh, make you laugh, or make you think about a truth." But yes, sweet spot can be very, very difficult when you're telling edgy humor, and you can often miss and make people upset. So you got to be careful, but it comes with the territory. Again, if the worst thing is that you said something that wasn't funny or offended, of all the things you can do in society, trying to crack a joke which doesn't land and offends is the least horrible thing you can do to other human beings. So I think you got to give people a lot of leeway. Sometimes when people go crazy and pull out their hair and spend their whole day on Twitter going ape about some comedian's joke or a Dave Chappelle show. Somebody coming and throw a rock through your window, that's bad. Dave Chappelle telling a joke that you didn't like, it's okay. It's not the greatest, but it does happen.
So would you say advice to any young person that's paralyzed by society's impracticalities is to take action by doing stand-up comedy?
I think it helps a lot. It always helped me. When I mean, that's one of the reasons I got into comedy. I had a lot of thoughts and feelings and passions. And I think a certain degree growing up, especially when you're young, you feel very powerless, to express yourself or to change anything. I found comedy to be very therapeutic. I could take all this agita angst inside of me and all these things I was feeling and just throw it out there and make it into something that was entertaining and make people laugh about it or point out things I felt they wanted to look at. And I think that is a good way to take all that instead of going out there and being cruel or mean to other people, making humor out of it, is a great way to express your opinion without actually doing something that's, I think, truly lasting or harmful to people. People say comedy acts like a shield so you can say horrible things to people and get away with it. I don't think it's that. I think that we all have a bit of an id and things that bother us and things that are not acceptable that we think. I think putting it out there and finding a way to make it into humor, which involves a lot of creativity. It's not easy I mean, anybody can have an opinion and write a horrible blog about other people. Turning it into humor involves creativity and it involves intelligence and it takes a lot of work to actually make it funny. So I think that actually that process really kind of makes you examine yourself and what you're thinking, but also turns something that could be very just an ugly thought about a group or anxiety about relationships or women or men or whatever you're going through. And you find a way to channel that and to explore it in a healthy way, which actually makes other people laugh and gets them to think about it in a unique way. So no, I think it's definitely the way to go for young people. If you're feeling something, make a joke out of it. You'll find you have a
Exactly.
better perspective on it.
Absolutely. All right, very important question. Advertising and self-promotion. Who advertises themselves more, the comic, the comedian, or the magician? You know that place where you're not conscious and you're not sleeping either? That's your power bill to the electric company. Right here. I want us to be here with free energy, where the Wardenclyffe Tower meets the Eiffel Tower. But that's not where we are. We are here, where you've got the utility and you've got residential solar. Between these two, we know which one saves you money. This is where we can go in the meantime. But this is where I want us to be now, and this can be done now. So let me deputize you to represent DOSE, Department of Solar Efficiency, and let's get on the podcast and get the message out today. See you soon.
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. Um, I think the comedian advertises themselves, or if you're the stand-up comic. I mean, I guess I'm more of the comedian since I write. It's hard to self-promote yourself as a writer because other people are saying your words and you have to sell your scripts. I mean, most people have no idea what I've written and what I've done. So, but if you're a comic, you're on stage, your self-promotion is your act. It's right there. Everybody knows you. And I think that really does help to self-promote you. Musicians, they're in a whole different thing they're doing themselves. I mean, if you pull off a great trick, it'll go viral. But no, I think comics have the best opportunities to self-promote because it's you and you're naked up there with the microphone. I think that's what makes being a comic so hard, but so rewarding is that you're playing yourself on stage, being a funny person with all your neuroses and all your ideas. And again, I think that is the most effective form of advertisement and self-promotion you can do.
Well, so is self promotion seen as selling out or is it necessary for survival?
Totally necessary for survival. I don't think that you can be, I mean, you can be like you can be like the secret sort of blogger writer who no one ever sees, but I don't think it's a sellout. I think some people are born to perform. And I don't think that's a surrender or a lessening of yourself. I'm not great at standing on the stage, just because of, I mean, I got the guts to do it, but I'm not as good as some people. Some people just naturally gifted to stand there with a mic and just rattle off jokes and be great. there's nothing about selling out because you do that, and if you're good at it, you should do it. It's a skill. It's a very God-given skill. It's hard to do. Some people would say it's the hardest thing in all of entertainment is to be a stand-up and to go out there and put yourself out there like that. So no, I don't think it's a sellout at all. I think it's great. Anybody can do it. I applaud you.
Well, that's most people would agree, I think. So, censorship and offense. So, does a comic avoid offense while a comedian courts it to prove a point, like a magician?
Yeah, I do think well they both do it, and I've done it too. I've purposely written things I knew would just offend the living hell out of people and make them mad. And there's hot button issues. Certain things you make fun of, it's going to get people mad. I think that you should never self-censorship necessarily. The best comedians really push the edge. I think if you look at Richard Pryor, you look at Eddie Murphy when he first came up, you look at Dave Chappelle now. I mean, the best comedians really push that envelope. I mean, if you look at a film like Blazing Saddles, that film really should have started a riot. It's so
Yeah.
offensive in so many ways, but it's brilliant. I mean, it talked about race relations in a way that people couldn't normally talk about them, and it really made people think. And so, no, I think that you should not be afraid to offend as a comedian. You have to be a little bit fearless and fly without a net and just go out there and do it. And if you do offend, like I said, when I was in college and I did this newsletter and I offended the hell out of people, okay, it's easy to say you're sorry. And I'm sorry, that's not what I intended and to go back. But I wouldn't take that back. I wouldn't say I didn't need to go through that. I just found that really being super offensive wasn't my style of comedy. But again, I don't tell anybody they should censor themselves. If some people can make the most offensive, horrible things the funniest thing in the world, and I give them full credit for it. I mean, like you look at South Park, who's not being made fun of? Timmy, they make fun of handicapped people, and it's hilarious. But I think it's done in a way that nobody takes offense because I think it's an even playing field. Everybody's being made fun of, and as long as that's understood as the rules, I think that nobody takes it the wrong way, and I think that it's very healthy for us, not just the comedians themselves, but society to do it that way.
All right. So, who survives better in the cancel culture environment? The comic, the comedian, the magician, or the mudslinger?
The mudslinger survives the best because the cancel culture environment actually, the mudslinger actually, the truth is, if you're a mudslinger and you're really just saying things that are really just getting a rise out of people, and that's your sort of deal, you're the Howard Stern. You're never truly going to get canceled. You're too big to get canceled, right? I think a lot of comedians do get canceled. I think you can offend people and get blacklisted in Hollywood and other places. That's very true, and because comedians tend to be behind the scenes, writing jokes for other people. It's very easy not to call you. I think, if you're a comic and you're out, I mean, look at the guy who did the Puerto Rican joke at the Republican, convention, for Trump. He's still working. I didn't hurt him one
Well,
bit.
yeah, he's got his own shtick, right? Kill Tony.
Yeah, that's his stick, and if you're into his stick, you'll watch it. I mean, and Lenny Bruce had a similar. I mean, that goes way back to tell these really edgy jokes, and I don't think that it. I think they actually thrive in a cancel culture environment. If you're on the edge and people think you're going to be taken away and removed, so they can't watch you anymore. Ironically enough, that always seems to make the person, the comic more popular. So I think, yeah, in reference to your question, yeah, the mudslinger, without a doubt, that's their whole game is to be offended and shown and people getting mad. But yeah, I think the comedians don't get canceled, especially if they're big. They do just fine, and they'll develop a fan base that's based on nothing more than the attempts to cancel them. But I do think that people who write jokes are in a different position because you don't have a lot of power. You're really depending on other people to hire you to write the jokes or to get on a show, whatever it's going to be. And you got to tread carefully. You can be easily blamed and replaced. And if people decide you've offended in some way and you're a jerk, you're a Nazi. You're not just telling jokes about Nazis, but you're the
Right.
Nazi. Yeah, no, you're not gonna have a career. They'll cancel you. There's no
Yeah.
question. So you gotta know who you're dealing with, and you gotta think about the joke before you hand it in. Fortunately, the touchy-feely zeitgeist never didn't cancel me, but I did have to explain to him for a while. Look, it's not a Nazi joke. Trust me. So
Yeah,
yeah,
you
so
got to
I
be
try
careful
to
of the
think
letter
about stuff.
Z these days, right? It's been taken out of context and put into war zones, and now, hey, that's the new target, right?
Right.
So, timing and delivery, science or art? Do comics rely more on structure and comedians more on rhythm and emotion?
Yeah, I think that's totally true. I think that when you're on stage, I think you really have to play the rhythm of what's happening with the audience, and you can pick it up. A good comic on stage can really just will understand the timing, and that's what the genius. I mean, look, a good comic, can have a banter with the audience just on the fly, and just understand that that's the moment for that, and know how their jokes should land. As a comedy writer, you're a little bit more constrained. You have to rely on structure and payoff and setup of jokes because you're not reading. You're in a room alone. That's one of the things when you're a comedy writer. Maybe you're lucky if you're in a writer's room or you're with another person that you can bounce the jokes. My wife, is really sick of it because I always run into her room and say, "Is this funny?" Because I need somebody to bounce the jokes off.
Yep.
Whereas, a comedic has they're in much better sense to just play the tone of what's happening. And a good comedic, person can do that really well. So they're much less on structure. They're much more on instinct and a sense of things. And the great ones have it. They're just a brilliant sense of what's going on in front of them and when that joke needs to land. That's why when I sometimes I direct, comedy things, and if I have good comedians I'm working with, I give them freedom to improv because a lot of times they'll land my jokes better than me or they'll riff off my joke better than me and find the good spot for it and nail it. And I think that that's just an internal clock. You can't teach that. Just some people have that sense of where things should be and how to say it and when's the best impact for that joke.
All right. I agree with that one. So, laughter versus applause. So, are comics chasing laughs and comedians chasing applause breaks that validate the message?
I think that's a great way of putting it. Yes, absolutely true. I think comics are always chasing laughs because that's their feedback, right? And if they hear real laughter, they know the jokes are working, right? But as a writer, if you get in, a writer, you're like, okay, if nobody laughed at my joke, but I won an Emmy, okay, great. That's perfect. I got my message. I think comedic writers always aspire to be not they aspire to be funny but deeper than perhaps that they really are. You want the validation, you're right, of what you're trying to say with the joke as much as anything. Where I think, on stage you're just naked, and I think that you really are feeding off the laughs and the energy of the laughs, and you're going for that more than anything. If everybody walks away just wiping their eyes from tears from a stand-up set, you've nailed it. I've never met a comic yet who didn't. That was good enough for me. Whether they got all my jokes or understood the deeper meaning of it, great. But they all laughed. That's perfect. So you nailed it in your question. I think that is the difference. I think writers tend to be a little bit more cerebric, and sort of like wanting to have like certain messages across and wanting people to pat them on the back and say that was a really deep joke. They don't just want a joke; they want a deep joke.
Yeah, so I just added the Emmy to that part of the question because you have a good point. Because from a writer's perspective, like what proves that you actually did it, right? And I think obviously the Emmy in writing would be it, right?
One of the funniest things, Jeff, if you ever listen to, I don't know if you know about this, there's this big debate this rivalry between South Park and Family Guy, and then the South Park guys really started criticizing, the Family Guy, Seth MacFarlane a lot, saying he just goes for the laugh. He's not even trying to tell a story because of all the cutaways and all that stuff. So right there's the difference. The South Park guys think of themselves more as comedians. Like they think their show has meaning and purpose and that it's telling a complete rounded story. And, where Seth MacFarlane will cut to any damn thing just to make you laugh, and he'll milk it forever just to make you laugh. It's a real difference in how they're coming at their comedy. I mean, I'm not saying one is better than the others. I do understand what the South Park guys are saying, in terms of fully rounded episodes, and meaning at the end of it. But I mean, Family Guy's freaking hilarious. So
Yeah,
I
that's
think
a
they're
great
both achieving their
comparison.
ends.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the bookends of writing different kinds of comedy, right? So,
Yeah.
comedy is commentary. So, when does a comedian cross into being a philosopher or a preacher?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Um, I mean, to a certain extent, I think it depends on whether you're saying something. Getting back to what your original point makes, that if you're getting in your stand up towards a deeper meaning, and I think some of the best stand ups I've ever seen have a deeper thing to say about society. I think Lenny Bruce was like this. His comedy was in your face. It was the first really cursing comedy and using bad words and talking about forbidden subjects. But Lenny Bruce became kind of a philosopher, right? He was trying to say something about society. I think that Richard Pryor's monologues are very much we're trying to say something about society. And when he was at his best, he wasn't just trying to be silly. And Dave Chappelle at the end of a lot, especially lately, has turned into more of a philosopher comedian, telling very long stories that really evolve into more of a message. Like even the story from The Closer that got him into so much trouble, he was really trying to make a comment about how, even in the trans community, I think people can get shut out for just really supporting him and that the cancel culture is bad. That's not that funny of a subject. It was more philosophical. There was funny moments in it. So I think that's when a comedian sort of becomes a philosopher, when they're actually trying not just to get a laugh out of you and find a little bit of a truth in men, women relationships or black and white, but they're actually making an important point that makes you walk away from the set and go, wow, that's interesting. That made me think about something. I think that's when it becomes philosophy, and it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's great. It's brilliant, when a comedian can do that.
All right. Here's now the complex question. Board
Oh no.
game Zoomcast, play
Uh,
versus performance. So, if comedy were a board game Zoomcast, are you competing as the colorist, adding tone, mood, and shading, or the Foley artist, building punchlines with soundscapes and timing?
oh, that's a great question. I think for me personally, I like to think as I'm more the colorist. Like I'm filling in. Like, I'm creating. I rely on the comedian to do the Foley work, right? They have to have the timing. They have to have the facial expression, the body language to sell. And that's like almost like the Foley. I'm coloring in. I'm setting it all up for them. So it's a three-dimensional scene and they're ready to go. But I'm setting them up to perform it as the Foley artist and be the bang, the person who hits all those marks. That's how I kind of look at it. I mean, other writers may look at it differently, but that's how I see my role.
I agree with that one. Okay, so we have a tradition here in the Comedians and Elevators podcast where the previous guest asks a question for the next guest. The
Oh,
previous
that's cool.
guest, right? So the previous guest was Marcus Brooks. And his question for you, Scott, is what is the identity that you hold as an artist that makes you stand out from the rest?
Ooh. Well, one thing that I hold, is I would say that's unique to me, right, from other people who write comedy is that I'm mixed race. So I grew up, I'm black, I'm white, and I'm Latino. So I think I come at comedy in a unique way that I like to touch on subjects of culture and race and ethnicity, in a unique way because I've experienced all these things, but I sort of have license to really talk. To put it this blunt, I have a license to shit talk about anybody since I fall between so many lines and I'm part of
Mhm.
all these different groups. I think that's what makes me unique. I have a unique perspective where people from certain racial groups or certain cultures, they're very much locked into where they are and where they grew up. I'm a free agent. I'm a nomad along those lines. So I can bring a lot of just unique perspective to my humor and my jokes, along those lines and make people break down walls between different racial groups and make people look at it in a unique way that they wouldn't normally be able to see, coming from a comedian or a comic writer who's part of their group or from another outside group. It's funny because I have people come up to me from different races after I write jokes and they'll be like, yeah, 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 you told them you're on our side. And I'm like, and then somebody from like the other group will kind of be like, oh, yeah, that was great. Yeah, they don't get you at all, but you and these guys, we get it.
Right.
It's funny how you're on everybody's team when you're mixed race. I'm like, yeah, totally, I get it.
But can you touch on Asian hate?
That would be, it's interesting. I could touch on that as a comedian. I could. I would feel weird making jokes that were like making fun of Asian or putting the Asian people down because of it. But yeah, I think you can make jokes about that. It just depends how you approach it. I think
You'd
if
have
you've
to use a different approach than you normally would.
than you normally would. But again, as a person who's experienced racism and stuff like that, and I've been a victim of hate crimes growing up, at various points. My family was immigrants, right? So when we moved to LA, people threw rocks at our house. I know what that experience is like.
Mhm.
I can make fun of it and find humor in like, oh my God, they should have used bigger rocks, or something different, or something cool. They should have thrown eggs or something so we could have made omelets. But you
Right.
can, you can make fun of it. But I do understand how jokes like that can really hurt people. So I guess my perspective as a mixed race person or a person who's been through that kind of stuff allows me to know where the line is, where it's hopefully, where that's funny. Now that's getting into something that's going to make somebody cry because I know that would make me cry if I told that
Right.
joke and I heard it. So I think, that's kind of, it's good to be where I'm at because I think I can understand both what's funny about a joke, but also where it goes a little too far, it gets a little too personal to make a point.
All right. So, last question, legacy. Who gets remembered? Will the comics Type 5 survive time, or will the comedian's cultural point of view be more timeless?
Hmm. I think people, an amazing question. It's really, it's a 50-50 thing. I can't say one or the other because if you look at something like, put it this way, we remember all the great comedians forever. Robin Williams, Charlie Chaplin, Red Fox, John Belushi. They're iconic. They're never going to disappear from pop culture or our sort of, our memories of them. Bob Hope will always be Bob Hope. You're
Hmm.
always going to remember these people. But the impact of the jokes, like a lot of people, if you showed them a picture of Lenny Bruce today, nobody would know. But the jokes that he did and how he changed comedy and that he made all these taboo subjects in America okay to talk about has had just an tremendous influence, which is still with us today. Without Lenny Bruce, we would have no South Park. We would have no Family Guy. Dave Chappelle whole act would not exist. It would be way too edgy for people to live with. So I think it's both. I think the personality of iconic comedians will always be with us because they're just beloved, and it's just something we'll never. We'll be watching Charlie Chaplin 1,000 years from now, but I think that the impact of and the message of certain jokes will resonate forever, even if the person who was doing it isn't as well known for doing it. But I do think it will resonate and stay with people.
All right. So, where can everyone find you online, Scott?
Oh, all right. So you can look me up online. I do a bunch of different stuff. You can find me non-funny stuff. I do a lot of horror stuff. You can find me on Spotify. I do a show called Midnight Caller, which is a horror show. We tell horror stories. I'm the narrator, although my voice sounds like Thanos from the Infinity Wars. We put these effects on it, but it's very cool. So look for us on Spotify. That's very cool. Online, you can find me on my YouTube channel. That's where most of my funny stuff lies. I do most of my comedy there and on my Instagram account. Look it under Scott Marcano or Diablo Comics. That's also a comic book company I run. And I do a lot of comedy animation shorts. I do a character called Homie Genius who tries to help you with homie advice about things that are going on in the world. You can find him on YouTube and on Instagram. So look for me there. Just type in Google Scott Marcano on YouTube or Instagram, and you'll see all my wacky stuff there.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Scott, thank you so much for being my guest. And for everyone, please like and subscribe. And we will see you in the next one.
Excellent. Thank you so much.